information there as well. All right, guys. Well, we want to get back in a habit of doing this, but one of the things that's important to me, important to our community, is that we have these Converge stories that become a regular part of our patterns of what we do and what we talk about. And for the last year, we've had a lot of people come up and share their faith stories, kind of, where God had brought them up to this point. But we also want to be sharing stories, kind of regular things, what God's doing week to week, what's going on in your life. And I'm going to share one of those from this past week. But I also want to nudge you and encourage you, if you have something like that, if something happens during the week and you're like, man, I'd really love to share that so people are encouraged and they have an opportunity to just pass that along to others and let people know what we're all about here, I want you to do that. Reach out to me. If you can't make it here in person or you're just nervous to come talk in front of people, we can pre-record it as well, so that works. But one of the things that's been going on this week is I sent out an email, but it was Ash Wednesday this past week. So if you missed Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, all the festivities there, sorry you missed it. Ash Wednesday the next day, and this goes way back in church history about in the church calendar as we enter this season of Lent, where we spend a lot of time reflecting on just kind of our mortality as humans and sinfulness and our brokenness. And this is a season where we spend a lot of time, hopefully, in confession and reflection on not just our brokenness, but our thanksgiving for Jesus who came, and we get to celebrate that on Easter coming up, not too far away, if you can believe it, April 4th. So we had this going on, and this week, actually it was several weeks ago, Vineyard Assisted Living, which we did that project for them a while back, sent them some gifts, and bought them lunch. They reached out and asked if I'd be willing to do a kind of Ash Wednesday service type thing for them. I'm like, my leadership practical brain said, well, that doesn't seem like an effective use of my time. And that's being real honest, and that's being brutally harsh and honest, right? And one of these books I read a while back, I don't even recall the name now, Friends of Time, is they talk about, it's actually a book on doing ministry for people with special needs and elderly. And they talk about how our culture sometimes puts a value on people. And unfortunately, as people get older, if they have special needs, they don't get a lot of value and they get left off to the sides, particularly in the church. We're guilty of this. And right there in that moment, it hit me. I'm like, man, I'm being that guy. Like, there's no inherent value coming in, so it's easy to push them off to the side. And I just felt so convicted knowing Jesus is very clear on how we should care for the elderly, how we should care for the widows, and so convicted, I'm like, no, I have to do that. I mean, there's no good reason for me never to do this as a pastor. And so I said, yeah, I'll do that. And they just wanted me to come and we're masked and we're in their vacuum locked doors and in a safe type setting and just do the Ash thing and kind of the words that go with it. And I realized, and maybe it was out of penance, I don't know, but I realized, I'm like, man, I don't want to just go rub some ash on their head. I want to encourage them. I want to do something nice for them. So Carter and Lauren and I put together a little service for them, and some of you guys may have got a chance to watch that. I put that out there. And so I show up on Wednesday after lunch and had quite a few people come out, and it was just so cool. They came out, and I didn't really know what to expect. If I'm a newer pastor doing some of this old church business, and so it was my first time ever doing an Ash Wednesday thing, so I was kind of nervous myself. And we just had this one-on-one time with each person that came out where I got to talk to them, pray for them, ask what I can pray for them. And there were just several encounters where just tears were in their eyes, and they were just filled with gratitude for the time that I was willing to give them, ironically, that I was kind of doing begrudgingly at first. And I walked away, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but I walked away so encouraged by their faith. There was this woman who said, I'm 99 years old, and God has been good to me. And instantly, I just felt so small and inadequate as a person of faith, realizing she's lived 3 of my lifetimes, and she has so much to teach me. And I walked away from that just with the the optimism and the hope of, man, I'm so glad that I did this for them, but in reality, they did this for me. And so I want to encourage you guys, especially as we go into this topic, living for others today, that we push into this and particularly push against this tendency for ourselves to push people aside because it doesn't fit our schedules or our agendas. So that's a little story from this week, and I hope you appreciate it. Now we're going to jump into some opening worship together.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jake. I am one of the worship leaders here at Converge, and we're going to do something a little different this week than just going right into music. We haven't done one of these yet, at least to my recollection. There's this idea of a liturgy where it's a responsive reading where usually there's somebody that maybe leads another line, and sometimes you read together. So you're going to see some instruction on the screen here, but I want to tell you about this liturgy that we're going to get into first. This is from Philippians 2, 5 through 11. And basically, this verse is one of the most, I really think it's one of the most perfect pictures of who Christ is. It speaks to Christ, the fact that he is God, that he is of that Godhead, the three in one. But it also speaks to the idea that Christ is also man. Christ is here on earth in our form. And I think that what's neat about this is, as Paul was writing to the Philippians, it's thought that maybe this particular liturgy was meant to be a song. So what we'd like to do is we're going to get into this responsive reading, and I'm going to read the first part. You guys are going to read the second part back to me, and then we'll read the last part all together. So if you guys would stand for this, we're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. All right, here we go. You should have the same attitude toward one another that Christ Jesus had, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a slave, by looking like other men and sharing in human nature.
He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. As a result, God exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name.
So that, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. All right, we are going to get into our first song here today. You guys will recognize this one. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship his holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship his holy name, and sing like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. You're rich in love and you're slow to anger. Your name is great and your heart is kind. For all your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to shine. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. Worship your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore, forevermore. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. Worship your holy name. Worship your holy name. Lord, I'll worship your holy name.
I gave you a little primer with that story, and remember, I want some more stories. You need less of me, and I want more of you, all right? So, as I kind of mentioned, previewed there, we're going to be talking about what it means to live for others, this new lease on life in this series. And we got to hear from Josh last week, and it was really awesome because some of you may not know that. I can't remember if he mentioned it or not, but that was Josh's first message ever, which is pretty cool. And we're excited about giving him practice for when he starts his new church here pretty soon, hopefully. And but also because I loved the process that went through to that. He really grinded because he struggled through those words in the Bible and actually had to process, man, do I believe this or not, and grind. And we talked a lot about it leading up to that point, and I just love his vulnerability and his honesty in the way he delivered that, and he delivered it well. So I hope it was as meaningful to you as it was him and it was me. But we're continuing on this week, and this series really is about what it looks like in the same way that Paul, in terrible circumstances, when it didn't really make sense to be as optimistic as he was about life, to kind of have this new look on life, this new lease on life like he did. I mean, you think about a guy like Paul. This dude was a driver. There's no doubt about it. He started many of the churches around the Mediterranean. He went up into Rome. Many people believe he may have gotten as far up into France. And you think about a guy who's a driver like that and stuck in prison on this mission, like, he's not happy about that. Let's be honest. This is why he was contemplating, man, should I just die and go to be in heaven, right? Like, this is the kind of thing he was struggling with. But in the midst of that, he found a way to see the purpose and have a bigger reason behind it. And that's what we talked about last week. And then the week before, looked at what does it mean to grow together and how important that is in our journey towards transformation, because we need people around us, and by God's grace, those people help us to grow in love, grow in wisdom, grow in character. And Paul and the Philippian church certainly had that around them. And today, we're taking step 3 here in looking at how we're called to live for others in the wake of that. And so we're gonna jump in the first 4 verses of Philippians 2. And you already heard verses 5 through 11. We did that interactive reading. Hopefully for you online that came through. That was the first time we were playing with a room mic and stuff like that. So hopefully that was a good experience for you. We're learning. But I'm going to read these first four verses from the Message translation. I'm going to tell you why in a second, but just go ahead and listen as we do that. If you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Push yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. And I love, those are four really strong verses, especially in that. And the point of that and why I shared it in the message is because it does such a good job of capturing the heart of those first four verses. That's a paraphrase translation. Some of you may already know this, but basically what that means is instead of trying to, as much as you can, a word-for-word translation, it's a kind of look at a paragraph and try to interpret it as a whole to communicate to that language and to that culture. And they have these for different languages and different cultures as well. But what I want to do now is read a more word by word, and there's no truly accurate word by word because there's not all the same words in two different languages, but as close as you can get in the NET, the New English Translation, which is a good one. It's similar to the NIV, if you guys are familiar with that. But it says this: Therefore, if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort provided by love, any fellowship in the Spirit, any affection or mercy, complete my joy and be of the same mind, by having the same love, being united in spirit, and having one purpose. Instead of being motivated by selfish ambition or vanity, each of you should, in humility, be moved to treat one another as more important than yourself. Each of you should be concerned not only about your own interests, but about the interests of others as well. You should have the same attitude toward one another that Christ Jesus had. And that's that bonus verse that leads into what we read earlier to give you some context in that. But what I want to do is I want you to see, first of all, the bigger message here is just that Paul is trying to communicate to his people what this selfless life is all about. And we're going to be looking at specifically verses 1 through 18. We're not going to hit the rest of the verses in this chapter directly, but they do really in a big way, fall in line with exactly what we're talking about today, because it looks at Timothy and Epaphroditus as really exemplars to this way of living, and he talks about them to the Philippian people in their service to them. So I'd encourage you, hopefully you're in a huddle. That's our 2 to 4 person, very, very small groups. But hopefully if you're in that and you guys are doing this, you can do your huddle by focusing on some of these latter verses. If you're not in a huddle, if you're watching from other places, this is a great thing to do on your own, is just look in how Timothy and Epaphroditus lived this out a little bit. But we're going to look at this, and the reason I switched over to that word for word is because I wanted to point out particularly one word that's really important in this, and it's very anticlimactic because it's at the very beginning, and it's not that very much of a fun word. It's therefore. That Message translation doesn't have that, and that's not a huge big deal, but what I want you to see is why this is important. Therefore, for some of you kind of grammar nuts out there, therefore is an conjunctive adverb. I had to look this up. I don't know that offhand. It's a conjunctive adverb, and it's a little bit like a conjunction and a little bit like an adverb. It's tying together two ideas, and like an adverb, it's modifying something else. An adverb modifies another word, like a verb or an adjective or even another adverb. This modifies a whole clause or a whole idea. So when you see that therefore word pop up, it is important, this un in the Greek. And what this does, it tells you everything that's about to be said modifies what was just said. And why this is important is because what did we talk about last week? We were talking about, as Josh led us in, this living in the midst of struggle, living in the midst of difficulties and challenges. And then he says, therefore, and then you have to say, therefore what? And so he goes on and he talks about living for others. He talks about unity. And I think this is really profound because if you really think about it, what's our tendency when we get caught in a situation where we're being pressed on every side? Our tendency is usually to huddle in, go into survival mode and kind of put a bubble around ourselves and ignore everybody around us. That's our tendency. But Paul's saying, in the midst of all those struggles we just learned about last week, therefore, go and live for other people, not yourself. This goes against what we're used to doing. This goes against our natural disposition here. And so even in Paul, what I want you to remember is that he was struggling with this to the point we talked about just a second ago. He was contemplating, man, wouldn't it just be easier to die at this point? But he remembered the reason for why he's doing this, and his reason was for other people. This is what's big, therefore, in his life, and it harkens back to the exact same theme in chapter 1, the power of community and how important that is, not just for transformation, but what we see here is unity. And so really the big idea, and I'm going to pop it up there over and over and over, so I hope you burn that away in your mind over the next 20 minutes or so, but it says, what I want you to get is that God desires his people to live united in mindset, love, spirit, and purpose in order that we can love others. And where you see that is in verse 2 particularly. He says, complete my joy and be of the same. So complete my joy. Paul is saying, make me the happiest man in the world. And how you're going to do that is by being of the same mind, having the same love, being united in spirit, and having one purpose. There's that purpose thing he was talking about last week. And he says, by doing this, so he's saying, make me the happiest man by being truly unified in the fullest sense, and mindset, and love, and purpose, all of that. And this is how you do it. He says, you do it by living for others. And this is what leads us into our memory verses for this week, verses 3 and 4. I'll read it again just so you lock it away. It says, instead of being motivated by selfish ambition or vanity, each of you should in humility be moved to treat one another as more important than yourself. Each of you should be concerned not only about your own interests, but about the interests of others as well. And in this, he's almost as if he's saying the true key to unity, and this is pretty important because we always wonder, how can we be more united? How do we get unity? He's saying is to live for others. Selflessness, serving others, the servant leadership that we see in Jesus. And so then you have to immediately ask, okay, if that's the key to unity is living for others, then how do we actually live for others? We have a vague sense of what living for others mean. We have a vague sense of helping others, that sort of thing. But he gives some explicit example, actually the example on how to live for others. And this is where he goes into that poetic kind of monologue about who Jesus is. And many people believe that this was one of the earliest liturgies of the church. This was something, a confession of sorts that they would say over and over about who Jesus is, but it had to do with the way in which Jesus lived for others. Yes, we look at it today as this great value of, man, this is a great theological statement that helps us understand Jesus. But actually, Paul, at this moment, was saying he wasn't so concerned. He just assumed you all knew that. And he's actually saying, hey, you know how Jesus went and died and lived as a human just for you and eventually got murdered on a cross? That's how you live for others. That is incredibly profound. And what I like about this is it says then the way that we live for others, first and foremost, is being humble. And I would add, as Christ was humble. And so I love, again, this Message version that says, put yourself aside and help others get ahead. That is such a great message. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. That is not very a cultural thing to do. Actually, we're trained at a very young age here in America particularly to be independent and do everything you can to get ahead in this life. And Paul is saying just the opposite. He said, put yourself aside. Help others get ahead. And there's this book, some of you guys did it in your huddles, called Hero Makers. This is the very premise of that book. It's a new way of not a new way of discipleship, a new way of talking about discipleship, about helping others experience Jesus. It's this idea that, hey, your job as somebody who's a follower of Jesus is actually to turn other people into the heroes of their own story. We like to do this thing with power where we like to hold on to it. And even the way the church practices mentoring people, there's this hook into power. As long as you're always here, a little Padawan, like I'm bigger, I'm stronger than you, right? And this idea of putting yourself aside, helping others get ahead, this idea of being a hue maker is you really minimize your role in their life and you lift them up to be these great heroes and champions of the faith. And you do it in such a way that they're aware of what you're doing, so they do the exact same thing for others after they've been built up as well. This is how we put others, ourselves aside and others ahead. And this is the very heart of what Paul is saying in here. But it's also just about being humble, learning, asking questions, not playing these like power dynamics and I'm better than you, I'm stronger than you. It's truly entering this world as a learner. And I feel like so much of what, unfortunately, the church has done wrong lately is we just go on rants and tell people what to do. And we don't actually listen to what's going on in their life. We don't actually listen to what their questions are. We don't actually listen to what their struggles are. We just keep telling them what to do and what to believe. That's a problem. True Jesus-like humility means emptying ourselves in such a radical way that we could imagine what it would look like for ourselves to lay down our lives for another. Now, I don't think anybody's going to cross out and plan on crucifying you, but you have to imagine what would this look like to actually put aside all the things I want. Do you remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? He said, oh gosh, I'm struggling for the words now. Father, take this burden from me, or something to that effect. He didn't want that. He was actually asking for something different, but he had to do it because he had to put others, us, you and me, so we could have salvation first and foremost. And that was his plan. So that's the big question, is what would it look like for us to lay down our lives each day for other people? That means how we use our time. That means how we use our energy. That means, like me, when I struggle with whether I help out this nursing home, am I gonna prioritize my life that way? And the answer should be most of the time, yes, I think. Now, here's the caveat to that, is Jesus did trust God would provide everything he needed, his Father, I believe it. But he also took care of himself. And we see so many instances where he'd go away and pray and be by himself, be with the Father. He'd just be with just a small group of people. He wouldn't be with the masses. He would eat and drink and rest and sleep. He took care of his basic needs. So what this isn't some crazy call to sacrifice your basic human needs for the sake of others and be a martyr of sorts. Actually, that would just be dumb. It is, actually, and I like how verse 4 says this. It says, each of you should be concerned not only about your own interests, but about the interests of others as well. Paul's assuming that you're already going to probably do a decent job taking care of your own interests. Usually, we're not guilty of taking care of ourselves. There are some, I believe, a small group of people that actually would be in danger of that, right? But most of us, we're pretty good at taking care of what we need. The problem is we don't take care of anybody else. And it says, but about the interests of others as well. He's making sure they realize it can't be just about you. It has to be about others. And this is our propensity, is that we get so caught up in our own world, in our own interests. It's working on my career, enjoying my hobbies, renovating my house, saving for my retirement, planning for my vacations, hanging out with my friends. You hear all those my's? This is how we tend to live our lives, and we forget about the yous and the thems. And those things in and of themselves aren't bad. I'm not trying to villainize those things. What I'm trying to say is that if that's all our life is, and all we are is fixated on these self-serving patterns, when we don't live for others, we're not truly responding to this call that Paul was getting the Philippian people to respond to, that Jesus continually calls us into. Can you do these and live for others? Absolutely. I think some of the best things you can do is invite people into your hobbies, invite people into your vacations. When you're at work, make that a source of ministry. And maybe you have limitations about how you can have those conversations in work, and that's okay. Do it outside of work. Build relationships. If you're in a kind of an intern type relationship, you have people under you, don't do this high corporate power dynamic thing. Actually make them a hero. Those are the kinds of things you can do in the midst of your normal routines that doesn't make it about numero uno, but it makes it about others. and living for others. Here's the thing, living for others, though, as you know, and just hearing this, and you're probably cringing a little bit, is it's hard. It's hard to do because you're just like, man, I've got a lot to do. How am I going to fit that in? And I'm telling you, if you try to fit it on and keep these clean boundaries, it's never going to work. You're just going to burn out. You have to figure out how to invite people into the things you're doing. But Paul recognizes here that it's hard. And I love this about it because he goes on in verses 12 through 18 and says this. He says, "So then, my dear friends, just as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but even more in my absence, continue working out your salvation with awe and reverence. For the one bringing forth you in both the desire and the effort for the sake of his good pleasure is God. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God, without blemish, though you live in a crooked and perverse society in which you shine as lights in the world, by holding on to the word of life, so that on the day of Christ I will have a reason to boast that I did not run in vain nor labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I am glad and rejoice together with all of you, and in the same way you also should be glad and rejoice together with me." Again, the big idea here is God desires his people to live united in mindset, in love, spirit, and purpose so that we can live for others, and we do that by living for others. But we live for others by having Christ-like humility, as we've talked about, and Jesus' humility. But also we can see here that we do it by hard work and perseverance, when we work hard and persevere. And I think this passage here is actually really reassuring, because he has this huge high call, go and live for others. And then the next several verses are the archetype example, Jesus the perfect doing it, which is really hard to live up to. And then he comes in here and helps us realize, man, this is going to be tough. And he does that by right away saying, with encouragement, just as you've always obeyed. He's reminding them, you've been doing this. Good for you. He's trying to encourage them. Continue working out your salvation, he says. And what I love here is he says, for the one bringing forth you in both the desire and the effort. And what I love about this line is he's recognizing in each of us, and probably himself, he's saying, I realize that you don't always want to do this. And God is going to give you the desire. And I've been there. I just told you about a time where I'm like, I don't want to do that. And he's reminding us, God's going to give us that desire. And not only is he going to give us that desire, he's going to give us the effort. He's going to give us the energy. He's going to give us everything we need to be able to live for others well. Reminding us again that this is going to be hard. And verse 14 certainly underlines that by saying, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Again, there's an assumption here. There's an assumption that it's going to suck. We're not going to like it. And that it might actually cause some arguments. And he's warning us, don't do that. And what he's not saying is, don't go pretend like everything's okay. I think that's maybe the wrong way to look at this. What he's saying is, remember who you're doing it for. Because right after that, he says, you shine as lights in the world. The whole purpose of this is so that we shine as lights in the world. If we're grumbling and nasty and angry and grumpy all the time, are we actually shining anything that anybody would ever want to do or be about in Jesus? I don't think so. Actually, this week, I had a friend call me up, and she was actually just really frustrated with the heart of the church. And I don't want to pin it on the whole global church, but the church particularly, or at least some individuals here in America over the last several months. And she'd grown up in the church, but she said, you know what, like, I'm not sure how much this church thing or religious thing has much relevance in my life anymore, because I look around and see all the things that people are saying and doing, and I don't really want to associate with that. And she wasn't discounting Jesus in her life or the role Jesus had, but she certainly was the role of the church and the people in it. And that breaks my heart a little bit, but I certainly, on the other side of it, I don't blame her. And that's where it's really hard is, are we shining as lights in the world? Or are we giving a an example to people of essentially reasons why you should never consider coming to become a Christian, right? Like, it's hard. And that would be the question I'd pose to each one of you as you're getting ready to say something this week, whether that's in person, in an email, at work, online. Ask yourself, is this going to paint a picture that's inviting people into the life of Jesus? Or is this going to paint a picture so that you're shining light of the world? Is this going to paint a picture of reason number 678 for this person why they don't want to become a Christian or join a church? It's an important question we have to ask ourselves. But he's going on to say, do not grumble, do not argue, so that you shine as lights in the world. And I think this is a big deal for us to realize that this is going to be hard, but that doesn't excuse us for not doing it. Remember we said the big therefore? He's just talking about all the struggles that they were in and saying all the more reason to live into helping others because they're probably going through it too. God desires his people to live in united in the mindset, love, spirit, and purpose. In order to do this, we have to live for others. This is what it's all about. And so what I want you guys to take away from this is just this, is that this is going to be hard, but at the end of the day, we see a bit of a glimpse of promise here. And Paul says that we'll be glad and rejoice together. And what I want you to understand is there is an upside to this. It's going to be hard, but he's foreshadowing, saying the people that you are, through your shining, are inviting people in, they're going to shine and they're going to rejoice together for this new life they have. Whether these are other people in the church or whether these people from the outside of the church that came in because of that light that you shined out. So that's good, but I want you to realize it can be exhausting a little bit to think about, man, I'm doing all this for other people, and I can think about this care of myself. What I want to encourage you with this is in verse 9, we see it, we read it earlier, it says, they're talking about Jesus, or Paul's talking about Jesus and his role coming in as a human, humiliating himself, living as a man. He says, as a result, God, the Father, exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name. What I want you to see here is there was a reward. Now, we didn't live perfect lives, so I can't guarantee you there's going to be a reward, right? I'm not saying this is prescriptive, that because Jesus got a reward, we get a reward. What I am saying is there is a tendency here, and I think some of you guys have lived this out, where when we start doing these things for others, there's something that comes back. Just like I shared about my story at Vineyard this week, but I've seen it happen time in and time again, where you're doing this thing you didn't really want to do, you're caring for others, and it just somehow, you get this reward out of it. Sometimes it's intangible, sometimes it's very tangible, and you should never do it purely for the reward. I want to emphasize that. It shouldn't be your number one motivation, but I want to encourage you knowing that all this trouble and work and exhaustion, sometimes you get something back now. And if you don't get it back now, the Bible's full of promises of the crowns that we'll receive in the next life. But I've seen this happen. I've been to Haiti a couple times. This is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, right? Like incredibly poor. And I go there and I see these, last time I was up in these mountains, they're far away from everything. I mean, it took like 2 hours to go 5 miles. It's so up and the roads are so bad. And these people are isolated. And I tell you what, the faith I saw in some of them, I was just like, wow, how are they that happy with their lives is the thought I had, which sounds terrible, right? But I saw something pure in their faith that I envied. And I realized, and they taught me, even though I was going to help them, they taught me what it is to be content, what it is to be generous, what it is to live with less. That's a reward that I got from that. I see it when I look around so often, just here in Converge, whether that's stories over the year of growth we've had, or very tangible things like Josh, who you met earlier. Some of you guys know him and Sarah. They were a part of the college ministry that Kenzie and I led way back when, and to see the fruit of what they're doing now and being here with us and wanting to go on this path of church planting and seeing them raise their family in a way that's God-honoring, that gets me excited. That feels like a reward for all that time that we invested. I see it. Lance and Liz, some of you guys don't know that. They are part of the college ministry before it was actually college ministry, when it was just a few people in our living room. Monica's back serving and helping our kids right now, came from that as well. I look at that and say, man, what a reward. That is a very intangible reward of just the excitement I have that they're a part of this. But the tangible reward, here they are now supporting Kenzie and me and this entire church as a result of that faith. And one thing happened several years ago. One of my good friends, he was going through a long bout of depression, and he came from a long ways. So we lived far apart, and to help me do something. It was kind of a surprise, last-minute thing, and I was asking him about it, knew kind of what was going on. And he'd said, I think it was a therapist or a doctor, I can't remember, had basically prescribed service to help with depression. And I thought that was really interesting. And as he started talking about it, it made a lot of sense, right? Because a lot of the roots of depression is you get so fixated on what the negative things are going in your life, it becomes a bit of a trap. And by going and helping others, living for others, not only do you start focusing on others, but there is actually this kind of reward, benefit, these endorphins that come out of that by serving others. And I just love how God literally created us so that when we help others, there's some therapeutic benefit to that. I just think that's amazing, actually. And so this is the positive. There is, and you shouldn't do it for that. I don't want to say that. I can't say that enough. Don't do it for the benefit, but there is a benefit to it. And that's my challenge for you guys this week, is to go out and live for others, to go out and figure out what does it mean to be lights that shine into the world. And, in a time more than ever where we need to figure out how to unite this world, not just the church, but hopefully the church first and foremost. This is an answer how to do that. We need to go out and start serving people. It doesn't take long to look around to realize how much uniting we really need, and it can start with us as individuals and as a Converge community going out and living for others. And that's what I'm so excited about next week. Engage Weekend. We purposely get out of this building. We purposely give you a free hour every week so you go plan something. And if it's not doing one of our things together that we usually do, like trivia and this thrift center next week, what I want to encourage you is go figure out what you're going to do to love on somebody next week. Figure it out right now. Do it before you leave your computer if you're home, or do it before you leave here tonight if you're in this room, and figure out what would it look like to live for others this upcoming Engage Week. And hopefully that becomes not just a one-week pattern, but a life pattern that you do. So with that in mind, we're going to start with communion. And so if you're home, you can go start running and getting your bread or rolls or milk or whatever you need to do communion. If you're here, we have these cool little disposable cups that you're going to use. But I want to get ready for that because I want us to be unified in doing something that has been a strong unifying event for the church for the last 2,000 years, and that is the Lord's Supper. That is communion, and it's commemorating a night when Jesus goes and washes the feet of his best friends, goes and has this dinner with them, telling them about what he's going to do for them, even though they don't quite understand, and goes and has this Last Supper with them. And here's the thing, it's a great unifying event for us, but I want you to be slightly encouraged, although I don't know how encouraging this is, maybe a little bleak thinking, is that where you or I struggle with living for others, with unity, you're not alone. Because right after the church was born, not too many years later, the Corinthian church was having some problems, this church in Corinth, southern Greece. And Paul wrote a letter to them to yell at them in 1 Corinthians. And he goes on and says in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, now, in giving the following instruction, I do not praise you, because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. For there must in fact be divisions among you, so that those of you who are approved may be evident. Now, when you come together at that same place, you are not really eating the Lord's Supper, for when it is time to eat, everyone proceeds with his own supper. One is hungry, another one becomes drunk. Do you not have houses so you can eat and drink? Or are you trying to show contempt for the church of God by shaming those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I praise you? I will not praise you for this. Strong words by Paul. What was happening in the Corinthian church is you have these wealthy people in their homes, and they've opened them up, and I don't have the architecture, but there's kind of these nicer courtyards in the center, and those who are wealthier are able to get there earlier, and those who are wealthier bring in some good food and wine, and they're starting before those more poor, impoverished, maybe bond servants, working longer hours come, and by the time they come, people are stuffed full, drunk, and these people are just showing up, have nothing. And he's basically saying, that's not the Lord's Supper. That's not communion. What you're doing there is an abuse to the community, is an abuse to unity, because you're not living for others, but you're living for yourself. And so he goes on to say in verse 29, for the one who eats and drinks without careful regard for the body eats and drinks judgment against himself. And this is really important. A lot of people have used this verse differently, but I want to point out what this is really referring to, the verses above that says, people who eat and drink without careful regard for the body of Christ, eats and drinks judgment upon themselves. He's saying, if you continue to live in disunity, if you continue to live in injustice and mistreating not only your own people, probably everybody, if that's the case, you are eating and drinking judgment against yourself when you take this. So what I want us to do right now is take some time. We're going to have just about a minute of just quiet reflection. We'll have some instrumental music going. But I want you to take a minute to realize that God's what he wants most for you to understand out of this is that unity is essential, and that the root of unity, the key to unity, is living for others. And I want you guys to, at this time, take that minute or so just to pray, to reflect, and I actually want you to confess for those ways maybe you haven't been living up to the call that God has given us. And I realize there's some probably very direct sins against the body of Christ that you have, or against people that maybe you need to confess. And for many of us, I know me included, it's just a sin of apathy where I just not thinking about it. I'm not caring enough about others. So go ahead and take a minute, pray, reflect, and confess, and know that there's grace and there's hope, and that's what we're going to celebrate in communion. But I want you to first take that time for confession, and after this minute or so, the song's going to start, and you can continue to pray, or you can actually sing this great song of confession, Lord, I need you, and then we'll take communion together after that.
Lord, I come and I confess, and bowing here I find my rest, and without you I fall apart, 'cause you're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you, every hour I need you, my one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you. sin runs deep. Your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. And holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. And every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you when temptation comes my way. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. So teach my song to rise to you when temptation comes my way. When I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. You guys can stand and sing this last chorus. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Thanks, team, for that. It is truly the words of our heart. You guys can sit in here. We're going to get ready to take communion together. So if you have your things ready, go ahead and do that. But I love that the line in there where sin runs deep, his grace is more. This is the heart of communion. This is the heart of what Jesus did that night. He sat with his 12 friends, one of which was going to betray him. Judas was there that night. That's incredible to me every time I think about that. And yet, there's grace for all people. And so this is what this is really a celebration about. I hope it was actually a good time of confession, reflection. Confession is an important part of us coming before our God, but also remembering that there's forgiveness in what he's done for us, because of what he's done for us, forgiveness for our sins. And it's not just forgiveness. What this represents is that celebration of it, but there's actually a physical grace infusion here that happens. We are actually being nourished. Our souls are being nourished when we take this communion. And so I want you to remember that. There's something powerful happening here, and it's truly wonderful to meditate on that. So go ahead and take those out, but Paul went ahead, and after he is going when he was talking to these Corinthians people, he gave an example, and he starts doing this communion liturgy. And he said, as Jesus said that night on the night he was betrayed, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance for me." And in the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This is the cup in the new covenant in my blood. Do this every time you drink it in remembrance of me." Now let's stand together and celebrate that wonderful news on that day when death was arrested.
Alone in my sorrow and dead to my sin, lost without hope and no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy begin. When death was arrested and my life began. And ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. My orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring out on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Our Savior displayed on a criminal's cross. Darkness rejoiced as though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and when my life began. That's when death was arrested and my life began.